All right, let's start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem, Rachat
Right.
Radash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is Why is there no difference between the Jew and the Greek? And this simple, easy answer to that is because they're both Israelites. It's just one was speaking Hebrew, keeping the law, statutes, and commandments, following high holy days, Sabbath, and the other one was speaking Greek and keeping the, religion and worship of the Greeks. And that's it. It's just that simple. And that's why certain scriptures in the New Testament use the word Greek. Others use the word Gentiles because you had Israelites that were scattered not only among the Greeks, but they were also scattered throughout Asia Minor, which today they call Turkey, in those regions there. Then you had, the Babylon and that region over there. You had Assyria, you had Medieval Persian Empire, or the areas of the Medieval Persian empires where Jake had been scattered. They were in Syria. They were in different places, So you had Israelites scattered all over the place. They were scattered all over the place, and that's why eventually they became, you know, Greek. And if you don't understand that history, then when it comes time to understanding the New Testament, you're going to be lost. And that's why we have a saying here in Great Millstone: if you don't know the history, you won't know the mystery, or you have to know the history in order to know the mystery, or something along those lines. So what I did was I just asked Chat a question, right? I said, how did the Jews become Greeks? It says the phrase, how did the Jews become Greeks, can mean a few different things depending on historical context. Most commonly, it refers to how some Jews adopted aspects of Greek culture. That's right. A process called Hellenization, and this is exactly what it is. So if you don't know the history of the Hellenization of the Jews or the Israelites, you won't understand the New Testament. That's why there was this devil, this Edomite, that was cursing us out at the camp in San Fran. He was one of those holy roller, demonic witch Christians. And when I asked him, you know anything about the Hellenization of the Jews, he just paused and just looked at me and didn't say anything. And then the elder Kwanawa, he quickly jumped on that because he saw the spirit. He jumped on it and he was riding on that because that's that's how you distinguish in the New Testament between the Gentiles and who they really are. Now, there's certain scriptures in the New Testament that condemn the Gentiles. That's talking about the actual Gentiles, the actual nations. And then there's some that open salvation to certain Gentiles. Those Gentiles are Israelites in a Gentile state of mind, or the Israelite foreigners, as we call them. All right. So it says, especially during and after the conquest of Alexander the Great, 4th century BCE, here is a breakdown of how this happened. Historical background. Alexander the Great's conquest, circa 330s BCE. Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, which included Judea, home to many Jews. After his death, his empire was divided among generals, the Diadochi, which were the rulers, leading to Greek rule over Jewish lands by the Ptolemies in Egypt and the Seleucids in Syria. Hellenistic influence. Greek became the language of administration, trade, and education across the region. Cities like Alexandria in Egypt became major centers of Greek Jewish life. That's why you had the Alexandrian Jews. You go to Acts the 6th chapter, it speaks about them, the Libertines, the Cyrenians, the Alexandrian Jews, which were all Greek-speaking Israelites, became major center of Greek Jewish life. Many Jews started adopting Greek names. This is why you have Priscilla, Aquila, Apollos, and many others, Timothy, Titus. The Apostle Paul himself, who was named Saul, changed his name to a more Greek sounding name, Paul. All right. It says language, philosophy, and customs. Let's read it again. Many Jews started adopting Greek names, language, philosophy, and customs while still maintaining their Jewish identity. Now, some of them actually just gave it all the way up. You had some that, that adopted the language, kept the knowledge of them being Israelites, and then you had others that were steeped so deep into it that they, were just calling themselves Greeks. They had nothing to do with Israel, because they had been, from generation to generation passed down. They had forgot who they were. All right. And we're going to get into that. Cultural and religious effects. The Septuagint, the Hebrew Bible, was translated into Greek in Alexandria, 3rd, 2nd century BCE. This translation is called the Septuagint, which means 70. It shows how deeply Hellenized Jewish communities or Israelite communities had become. They needed their scriptures in Greek, and that's certain ones of them. The Hellenic states. Hellenistic Jews who lived outside Judea, especially in Greek-speaking cities. This is why you have scriptures like there's no difference between the Jew and the Greek, were often called Hellenistic Jews. They maintained Israelite religious practices, but lived in a Greek cultural environment. Right, and then they were keeping the Israelite practices, religious practices, and they only spoke the Greek language. They weren't getting into all that, worshiping of their gods and all of that, because they knew that they were Israelites. That's why they would go to Jerusalem 3 times a year to worship the Father as commanded pursuant to the scriptures. So they weren't delving into, the religious, practices of the Greeks, the customs of the Greeks. No. Now they ate the Greek food, that was lawful. They weren't eating no pork, because they knew that they were Israelites. They were following the laws. That's why they would go and worship at Jerusalem. But then you had other Israelites that totally went away from that. It says conflict and resistance. Not all Jews accepted Hellenization in Judea. Tensions grew, right? And these ones that didn't accept the Hellenization of these heathens, look, later on in generations to come, and even at that time, they looked down upon the sellouts. Just like today, we look down upon sellouts. Anyone that's pining, shucking and jiving for Esau, call him a sellout, a Sambo. In the same way that they're looked down upon in this society is the same way that the Jews in Jerusalem looked down upon the Hellenized Israelites. The ones that were keeping the customs, law, statutes, and commandments of Israel and were speaking the Greek language, they were still being looked down upon. It says the Maccabean Revolt, 167 through 160 BCE, was sparked by Seleucid attempt to force Greek customs on Jews. Example given: banning circumcision, Sabbath observance, and even not being able to call themselves Israelites. This led to the brief independence of the Hasmonean kingdom. Examples of Jews who became Greeks: Philo of Alexandria, 1st century BCE through 1st century CE, an Israelite philosopher who blended Jewish or Israelite theology with Greek philosophy, especially Platonism, which is going back to Plato, which Plato himself was a J. So this individual here, he was Hellenized, and he knew he was an Israelite. But others that were Hellenized did not know that they were Israelites. It says here, Paul the Apostle, a Jew who knew Greek and Roman culture well and used it to spread Christianity. He used certain points, and he was well studied in the Greek. He knew about the customs, he knew about the games and all that. So he would use certain talking points, in those gladiatorial events, so on and so forth, to get his point across, dealing with, Yahweh Bashem Yahweh Shai. So it goes on to say, summary: Jews became Greeks in the sense that many adopted Greek language, philosophy, names, and urban lifestyles, especially in the what? Diaspora, which is the scattering. That's why the Apostle James wrote a letter addressing the 12 tribes that were scattered. The Apostle Peter addresses letters to, the scattered Israelites that were known as strangers. It says this Hellenistic Judaism influenced later Israelite thought and even early Christianity. But this process was complex and often resisted, especially in Judea. And that's where they looked down upon, even upon the what you call it, the ones that knew that they were Israelites, that were following the law, statutes, and commandments. But if you spoke Greek and you didn't speak Hebrew, you were looked down upon. Let's get a quick precept to show you that. Acts 6 and 1. It says, and in those days, when the number of the disciples was multiplied, there arose a murmuring of the Grecians against the Hebrews. Why? Who were these Grecians? These were Greek-speaking Jews, right? Because their widows were neglected in the daily ministration. Why? Because they were being what's the word I'm looking for? Biased towards the Hebrew-speaking Israelites and not helping the Greek-speaking Israelites as much. When you look up this word Grecian, that's why you got to look up your words, right? You look up the word Grecians. The word for Grecians there is Hellenistes. Hellenistes, right? And look what it says. A Hellenist, one who imitates the manners and customs or the worship of the Greeks and use the Greek tongue. You could use that, but really it means this: used in the New Testament of Jews born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. That's all it was. They were born in foreign lands and speaking Greek. This is why them clowns try to say the Jews and devout. No, there was just the Israelites. That's why here in Acts 2, we're going to come right back to this. Acts 2 and 5, it says, and there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of every nation under heaven. So you had some of these Jews that were speaking Greek. You had some of them that were speaking different languages. But the point is that they were all Israelites that were scattered. And they were coming to Jerusalem. Why? Because this was during the time of Pentecost. Feast of First Fruits. So they were already commanded to be there. That's why they were here. Because these same wacky-tacky Christians, they'll say that, the law's done away with. The other nations never received the laws. So these were Israelites that were coming from different regions, different countries, speaking different languages that came to Jerusalem to observe the Passover, the Feast of First Fruits, and the Feast of Tabernacles. In this case here was the Feast of First Fruits, which the New Testament calls Pentecost, which means 50. All right. So going back here, the next question I asked, I said, did some of those Jews lose their, I put Jewish as Israelite identity for the Greek one? Yes, some Jews did lose or intentionally abandon their Israelite identity in favor of a Greek one during the Hellenistic period. This happened in varying degrees and for different reasons, including why did some Jews abandon their identity? Social and political pressure, right? Because they wanted to, receive the benefits of, being Hellenized, the goodies, living good. Like here in First Maccabees 1 and 11, it says, and in those days went there out of Israel wicked men, right? So these were wicked men that already had it in their mind that they wanted to join the Greeks because they wanted to live a better life. They didn't want to be persecuted. They wanted to enjoy the goodies. This is what you call sellouts. Sambos. Right? It says, Let us go and make a covenant or an agreement with the heathen that are round about us. For since we departed from them, we have had much sorrow. See, we're being persecuted. They're killing us. We ain't able to, do the things that we want to do. This is too much. We just want to live in peace. So this device pleased them well. Then certain of the people were so forward herein that they went to the king, who gave them license to do after the ordinances of the heathen, which is what? Anything that they were doing, the gym, It says, whereupon they built a place of exercise at Jerusalem, according to the customs of the heathen, and made themselves uncircumcised. Some of them, the men, sewed the skin back on their rod, on their penis. That's called epispasm. And this lesson came, if I didn't say it, came through the inspiration of a video I was watching earlier, the elder Menat Zakba, and he was going into, I believe it was 2nd Maccabees, the 4th chapter, dealing with the Hellenization of Israel, something along those lines. And it prompted me to, to ask certain questions to the chat to see, what came up, to do a lesson on it. It says, and then also they also became uncircumcised. How? In their mind. This is why when you go into the New Testament, it speaks about their foolish heart being darkened, the ignorance that was in them, the vain traditions received from their fathers, This is what made them all ignorant, that darkened their foolish heart. It says, and forsook the holy covenant and joined themselves to the heathen and were sold to do mischief. And this is why they became Hellenized. And these same individuals, in process of time, as they started having children, they taught their children the Greek ways, not to circumcise the sons, to eat pork, so on and so forth, worship Zeus and all of that, and eventually their sons and daughters taught their children, so on and so forth, all the way to about 200 years into the future, dealing with when Yahushua and the disciples came on the scene. So by this time, it was well known, well established what had taken place. And the ones in Israel were the ones that did not sell out. You see? And they looked down upon the ones that did. Even the ones that spoke the Greek language. It was a lot of tension. So going back here, right, it says social and political pressure. This is why they lost their identity. In Hellenistic cities, especially outside of Judea, being Greek in culture and identity often meant better social status. See, since we departed from them, we had all much sorrow, man. Political rights and access to elite circles, just like today. And this is the same shit going on today. Jake selling out to these so-called elites so that they can be in those circles, so they can enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Jews who wanted to advance in society might choose to assimilate. And that's exactly what they did. They assimilated into the Greek customs. Let's go here so you can show you what the word assimilate means. Assimilate. To assimilate means to fully understand, absorb, and incorporate something such as new knowledge or experiences, or to adjust to or become part of a dominant cultural or social group. So they just pretty much mingled in there. Boom. Okay, they do that. Okay, they not circumcised. Okay, let me put the foreskin back on. They wear togas. Okay, let me wear a toga. They get branded. Let me get branded. They eat pork. Let me eat pork. Let me speak Greek. And these are things that slowly but surely, generation after generation, became etched and seared in the conscience of the rest of the Israelites that were growing up, that were descendants of those that were Hellenized. You see? You have to understand that. So it says, dropping Israelite customs and adopting Greek language, dress, philosophy, and even religious practices. See? And that's why it says their foolish heart was darkened. Internal desire to assimilate. Some Jews were attracted to Greek philosophy, art, and cosmopolitan ideals. they may have come to see Israelite laws like dietary restrictions, circumcision, Sabbath observance as old-fashioned or even embarrassing in a Greek cultural context. The same thing here, with Jake in the church. No, that's outdated. The laws are outdated. Those were the old Bible times. We're in new times now. Pass that pork chop in the applesauce. Religious apostasy. See, some Jews outright converted to paganism or participated in Greek religious rituals, which was considered a betrayal by traditional Israelite standards. Now you understand why those Israelites in Israel that were speaking Hebrew, that were following the Torah, looked down so hard on these Israelite foreigners, especially the ones that only spoke Greek and that followed the Greek custom, that they had nothing to do with Israel. You see why they looked down on them. Because that was a great betrayal of the laws. It says, a particularly extreme case during the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, 2nd century BCE, some Jews supported his effort to turn the Jerusalem temple into a Greek shrine, triggering the Maccabean revolt. And that's why they got, Mattathias, which was the father of the Maccabees. He got so zealous that he slew that devil, that Jake that was, sacrificing to Zeus. And then he even took out the ambassador that was sent there to compel Jake to do that. Degrees of assimilation. Not all Hellenized Jews completely abandoned Judaism. True. They didn't all abandon the laws, because some of them just spoke the language but kept the custom. But a lot of them completely abandoned their Israelite heritage. The spectrum looks something like this. Degree of assimilation and characteristics. Minimal. Adopted Greek language and dress but kept religious laws. Boom. Moderate. Blended Israelite beliefs with Greek philosophy, e.g. Philo of Alexandria. Right, that was another. High. Abandoned core Israelite practices, saw themselves more as Greeks. Who are these? Israelites. Complete. Left Judaism entirely, integrated fully into pagan society. And at one point, it was against the law to call yourself an Israelite. So if you couldn't call yourself an Israelite, what did you have to call yourself? Well, you had to call yourself a Greek. Because if you're in the Greek captivity and you can't call yourself an Israelite, what you going to call yourself, an African? Or you going to call yourself, oh, I'm Nepalese? No, you will call yourself a Greek, because that was the empire that was ruling at the time. 2nd Maccabees 6:6, neither was it lawful for a man to keep Sabbath days or ancient feasts, to say feasts, or to profess himself at all to be a Jew. So if you couldn't call yourself an Israelite, what did you have to call yourself? You had to call yourself a Greek. All right? Then it says, and in the days of the king's birth, every month, they were brought by bitter constraint to eat of the sacrifices. And when the feast of Bacchus was kept, the Jews were compelled to go in procession to Bacchus carrying ivy. Moreover, there went out a decree to the neighbor cities of the heathen by the suggestion of Ptolemy against the Jews. See, it wasn't just Seleucid. It wasn't just Antiochus Epiphanes. Also, Ptolemy did this. That they should observe the same fashions and be partakers of their sacrifices. That's where you had the Hellenization of the Israelites in Egypt, where the Ptolemies were ruling. And whoso would not conform themselves to the manners of the Gentiles should be put to death. Then might a man have seen the present misery. So now you see why certain Israelites chose to become Greek altogether and abandon their Israelite roots. Because they were at the point to be put to death if they professed or did anything that resembled the law. So back here, it says complete. Left Judaism entirely, integrated fully into pagan society. Example 2 Maccabees. The book of Second Maccabees, a Israelite text written in Greek, criticized Jews who uncircumcised themselves, a painful surgery reversal to blend in at the Greek gymnasium. Attended Greek athletic events which were often conducted nude, contrary to Israelite modesty norms. Built a gymnasium in Jerusalem and tried to register Jerusalem as a Greek-style city, polis. Summary. Yes, some Jews during the Hellenistic period gave up their Israelite identity, partly or fully, for Greek culture. This was usually driven by social, political, and philosophical motivation, and it sparked significant internal conflict within Israelite communities. You see? Now, these devils, they'll try to bring out scriptures like this in Galatians chapter 3, right? 3, I'm going to start at 26. The point is a little further down. Galatians 3:26, for ye are all the children of the Most High by faith in Yahushua. For as many of you as have been baptized into Yahushua have put on Yahushua. There is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither bond nor free. This is what prompted me to go here. That clown that the elder Menachem Zakba was talking about on his video, right? It says there is neither bond nor free, there is neither male nor female, for ye are all one in Yahushua. Now, this is the key point. Listen good. There's neither Jew nor Greek, right? And if ye be Yahushua's, then are ye Abraham's seed and heirs of what? According to the promise. Didn't we read yesterday in the book of Romans chapter 9, that these Christians are trying to go to now? For years they've been getting cut with this, going all the way back to the 80s, 90s, and I'm sure before that. And now all of a sudden they're trying to use this against us. Romans 9:6. Not as though the word of the Most High had taken an effect, for they are not all Israel, which are of Israel. See? That's talking about only the elect of the nation of Israel right now is going to get it. Not all Israelites are of the elect. That's all that means. Neither because they are the seed of Abraham, see, are they all children, but in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Completely go over that to try to, or the seed, not just because they're the seed of Abraham, that is, they which are the children of the flesh. See, the Israelites are the children of the flesh. That's not what this is talking about. It's specifically speaking about Abraham and his seeds. That is, they which are the children of the flesh. These are not the children of the Most High. So let's stop there. I'm going to come back to this. Let's go to Galatians 4 to give you an example, because this is the top seed of the flesh of Abraham. This is Galatians 4 and 22. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid, which is Ishmael, the other by a free woman, which is Isaac. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh. Right? Let's stop there. Romans 9:8. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, these are not children of the Most High. Galatians 4:23. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh. But he of the free woman was born by what? By promise. Who was that? Isaac. The flesh, that was Ishmael. The promise, that was Isaac. Going back to Romans 8. That is, they which are the children of the flesh, Ishmael, and the 6 sons of Keturah. Those 7 seeds of Abraham, just because they were Abraham's children, or they came out of his loins, didn't make them heirs. These are not the children of the Most High, but the children of the promise are counted for the seed. The children of the who? Promise. That's why we go back to Galatians chapter 3 And verse 29, and if you be Yahushua, then are you Abraham's seed, singular, because Abraham had 8 seeds, but only one of those seeds was chosen. And heirs according to what? To the promise. And Ishmael and the other 6 sons of Keturah were not heirs of that promise. This is why when Isaac came of age and Abraham was about to go back in the spirit world, Abraham gave everything that he had to Isaac, and he gave the sons of the concubine, he gave them gifts, but sent them away from Isaac because they were not heirs to the promise that the Most High made to Abraham, even though they were his sons, even though he had a great love for them. You know, those were his sons. That's why he was so hurt when he had to, send Hagar and Ishmael away. And the Lord said, don't let it grieve you. Let it be so. I'm going to make a great nation of him. Don't worry about it. But in Isaac is where the seed is going to be called. Promise. Going back to what? To the contract. You can't escape, or you can't disannul, or you can't cast away the contract. You got to deal with the contract, which you devils don't want to do. So that's why it says here in Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek. Why? Because they're both Israelites, and they both are the seed of the promise. They are the heirs. They're Israelites because the promise was made to who? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. All right. So with that, I pray that you brothers and few sisters have been edified. Till the next time I say shalom.